Hi, new season at the church. New season at the church is All Saints Day. This Sunday, as you can tell, everything is in white. White paraments, white stoles, white everything. And today we're talking about the second and third commandments. Second commandment is quite simple. You shall not take the name of the Lord thy God in vain. What does this mean? If you've noticed, and you can play along with this at home, you can go ahead and grab yourself a Bible, any Bible you want, and turn to the Old Testament, any page you want. Any page you want of the Old Testament will probably work like this. They kind of all do. And the way it works is if you turn the Bible to any page in the Old Testament, it will typically say the word Lord on it somewhere in those two pages. If it doesn't, flip a page, you'll find it pretty rapidly. And when it says Lord, you'll notice something interesting about the way it says Lord, and what you'll notice is that when it says Lord, it says capital L, and then it has like capital O, capital R, capital D, but slightly smaller than the capital L, and there's only one word in the whole Bible that works like that. It is the word Lord. Why does it do that? Why does it do that? That's so strange and so weird. It doesn't do it in the New Testament. By the time you get to the New Testament, it doesn't say Lord like that, only in the Old Testament. The reason for that is because in Hebrew, which is not the language we speak English, but in Hebrew, they had the word Lord in there because that's the name of God with all the vowels removed, all of them. And as you know, vowels are those things that make consonants pronounceable, I suppose. See, in the time of the Hebrews, they thought of the Lord's name as so crucial and so important and so holy and sacred that they didn't want to be able to misuse it at all. And therefore, they didn't want to be able to use it either. And so what that meant was you had the name of God being impronounceable. You couldn't say it. Impossible to say it. Instead, you had this word with all the vowels removed. We call it, in Latin, the tetragrammaton. Or is that Greek? Doesn't matter. And tetragrammaton is just a fancy way of saying the four letters because it's the word Lord with all the vowels removed. Now, that has some benefits and some drawbacks. That has the benefit of you can't misuse it, but it has the drawback of you can't use it either. And if you can't use it, you can't misuse it. But of course, we in the Holy Christian faith would say that we don't want to make God's name unusable, period. We want to be able to use it. We just don't want to misuse it. And what do we mean by misusing God's name? We mean misusing God's name as saying it for the wrong reasons and using it for the wrong purposes. For a lot of people, and I mean a lot of people, they only use God's name as a swear or a curse, like any other swear or curse. And the thing about swears and curses is that that's all they are after a while. They don't mean the thing that they're there to mean. They mean just a swear or a curse like you would any other swear or curse. You express disapproval, shock, anger, horror, that kind of thing with a swear. That's what you do. And so we don't want God's name to turn into that for us. We don't want God's name to turn into just a swear, just a curse, just something that we say. You want God's name to mean something and be important, which is why when we talk about God's name, we talk about taking it seriously, reverently, and deliberately. Now, the clearest expression of God's name is that of Jesus, Jesus of Nazareth, Jesus Christ, the Son of God. We don't have to wonder about what is God's name, what does God want to be called, because he tells you as much. He tells you that he wants to be called Jesus. His name shall be Jesus. And there is Jesus as he shows up in the pulpit of our church. He wants to be called Jesus. That's specifically the way he asked to be called. And we call him by that name. When we call upon his name, we pray, we praise, we give thanks, as it says in the Catechism. We don't want to take that name lightly, irreverently, or anything like that. We want to take it seriously, and that means that we have to take it with the level of gravity that it has. You don't ever want to misuse it, but you don't want to be shy of using it either. Just use it deliberately and reverently. That's a very important thing, because like with anything else, any other power, any other item or tool, we talked about this last time, that is powerful, if it's powerful enough to be useful, it's powerful enough to hurt you too. And in this case, we would take God's name and we would say, this is a powerful name. It is a word with power, and therefore we should take it deliberately and reverently, but we shouldn't be afraid to use it. Like with anything else that's powerful, like dynamite or fire or gunpowder or nuclear energy or anything else like that, the more powerful it is, the more dangerous it is, and the more you should be careful with it when you use it. God's name, no exception. But you should never be frightened to call upon it. You should be taking it with holy fear and reverence, yes, but not be like too terrified to ever use it or talk about it. God's name is something that he wants you to use. And lest we forget, when God came to earth in the person of Jesus Christ, he came to earth with a name that he wanted people to use, and he was very approachable. He was known as Jesus of Nazareth. While he was around here on earth, he said to people, well, when he was talking to people, they said, "Is this not Jesus of Nazareth? Is this not Jesus whose parents and mother and brother that we know? Like, we know exactly who this guy is. This is Jesus." He went by that name and was known by that name for a reason, for a purpose, that when people called upon him then, as well as calling upon him now, we know who this Jesus is. Back in the time of the Old Testament, you had people who were very concerned about not taking the Sabbath day properly. God made the entire universe in 6 days. On the seventh day, he rested, and that seventh day became a Sabbath to the Lord. Sabbath being the day in which you do no work. And by no work, they mean no work, nothing. That's beyond just taking a day off, because when we take a day off kind of thing, we go shopping, go to the store, drive around, go to the beach, that kind of thing, paint the fence, dig a hole, whatever it is we do. But for them, it was not just do no work like that you're getting paid for, it was do no work at all. And when they said do no work at all, they meant that very seriously. There was a part in the book of Numbers where somebody gets stoned to death for gathering sticks on the Sabbath. It's a big deal. It's a big problem. They wanted to make sure that you were doing no work at all because you were there to rest. And when they say rest, they mean rest, like do nothing. Now, the purpose for that time off was that you would have time set aside in your week for worship of God in his temple, in his house, that you would be there to worship God in his fullness and his wholeness. And he made the entire week a day longer so that that could be done and accomplished. And people were very, very, as I said, very serious about taking that time off, to the point that they would kill you for working too much on the Sabbath. But after a while, what happened was the day off part became the important part, and the worship of God receded into the background quite badly. And that's a problem. It's a real problem. It's a real problem because you're supposed to have that time set aside to worship God. You're not supposed to have that time set aside only for the purposes of doing nothing. But when they said do no work, they started checking up on what do no work means. Jesus has a lot of conflict with the people that he interacts with on earth over that subject. They don't see eye to eye on that matter. They don't have a lot of common ground. Jesus heals people on the Sabbath, tells them to take up their beds and walk, that kind of thing. And they do, and then Jesus gets into a lot of trouble for doing so. They get mad, they get upset, they get angry at him for healing on the Sabbath, for giving people their health, their life, their limbs back, that kind of thing. They're very angry at him for doing that. Even though the presence of God is manifest amongst them, even though God is literally present there with them and is working on their behalf, they are still saying, but you can't do anything. You're not allowed to do anything at all. And that was weird. It was weird that they didn't want the worship of God to get in the way of God's Sabbath. Now, we now in the Christian faith, we have time set aside to worship God on Sunday. And Sunday is a day off for most people. And you're given that day off, that extra day in the week, for a reason. It's not just for me time. It's not just to relax and take it easy. You're given that day off so that there's no work going on, so that there's nothing happening, so that you can spend time going to worship in God's house, hearing his word, listening to his preaching, and receiving the sacrament. It's a day set aside for that. But nature, as it says, abhors a vacuum. And what does that mean? That means that if you're not doing something with that time, something else will come and claim it. We're very bad for that. Very bad indeed. If you are not openly and aggressively doing something with that time, then something else is going to gobble that up and take it away. What do I mean by that? I mean that you don't have if you don't have that time set aside for worship in God's house, if you're just saying that's a day off, a day of rest, there are 100,000 tiny forces that are anxiously trying to gobble that time up and take it away from you. 100,000 things that want that time and will take that time if you don't fight them back. The day off as a day of rest, everything wants that day. The machinery of commerce and industry and activity wants your time. and it doesn't want to quit, doesn't want to leave you alone. Nothing does. You don't have the luxury of just saying, I'm just going to take a day off. Something wants that time. Something wants your money. Something wants your ability. So God expressly gave you time where he said, you can have this time. I'm going to give it to you. I'm going to set it aside for you. And that time you can have and you can use for the purposes of worship in my house. Because even at our absolute best, we can't possibly rest perfectly. We're always going to have to do something. So we, as you've noticed by now, we worship on a Sunday. The Hebrew people would have worshiped on a Saturday. And that's when you all ask me, but Pastor Jim, why don't we worship on a Saturday then? Why did we stop doing that? What's the point? And the answer for that is found in the importance of the days of the week. So I'm going to ask you a question. And I know I can't hear you, but I'm going to ask you a question. What day of the week is Easter on this year? And you'll all say the right answer, which is Easter's on a Sunday this year, because it's always on a Sunday. Correct. What day of the week is Christmas on this year? We have to think about that, because Christmas is not always on the same day of the week. Christmas moves around. Christmas is on a Sunday this year, 2022, but it moves around the week because it's on the 25th of December, and whatever day of the week that happens to be is whatever day of the week that happens to be. You see, Easter's always on a Sunday because Easter commemorates the day when Christ rose from the dead, and that is the single most important thing that has ever happened. In his resting in the tomb, which he did, he effectively rested perfectly in a way that's more than you and I ever could. Even at our absolute best rest day, we still have to do things like hit the bathroom, drink some water, and breathe and blink and stuff like that. Even if you're sleeping the whole time, you still got to breathe. When Jesus rested on the Sabbath, he rested from sundown on Friday until sunup on Sunday, and then he rose from the dead. And in doing so, he sanctified the day of Sunday, because every Sunday from then on is a commemoration of the resurrection of Christ. That's why we have that as our day of worship. We worship on that day specifically because it's a commemoration of the fact that Christ Jesus rose from the dead on that day, the single most important thing that has ever happened in human history. Nothing else even comes close. Jesus rose from the dead on the Sunday, and so therefore we gather together and we worship on a Sunday. People typically either have or should have Sundays off, but you've got to fight to keep it. Nothing is going to give you Sunday off unless you fight to keep it. Your job is not to let all of society do the heavy lifting for you. It used to do that. Back in the day, everything was closed on Sunday. Everything was closed on Sunday. You couldn't go to stores, shops, businesses. You couldn't grab brunch. Nobody had sports scheduled on a Sunday. There was nothing good on TV. Everything was shut down, basically, in order that you may have time to go to church. And that changed. That changed not because of anything that was done without our will, but instead we stopped being as diligent about this as we should be, and gradually people started scheduling stuff on Sunday because they knew, just like you know, that if they put something on Sunday that conflicts with church, you will give church up to go to that thing, whatever it is, doesn't matter. You see, part of our problem is that we didn't remember the Sabbath day and didn't keep it holy, and therefore that day that we had off, for us, it's for our benefit, truly it is, to worship God and to have a day where you're not being squeezed by everything. It's a good thing. You're supposed to have that. And because we didn't diligently defend that, it went away. And it'll continue to go away. It'll go away more and more over time unless we fight to defend it. That means that you as a Christian have the obligation to say, when somebody schedules something to do on a Sunday, when they say, do you want to go to the store? Do you want to grab some groceries on Sunday morning? Do you want to go to sports? Do you want to do anything like that on a Sunday morning? That you as a Christian have the obligation to say, no, I can't do that. I can't do that, not because I'm not allowed to do any work, but because the Sabbath day is there for worship of God. That time has been carved off and set aside for a reason, as a gift to us. And when we don't defend it, it goes away. So your job is to defend that. Your job is to say, I cannot be there. Can't be done. Can't do it. Sorry, lots going on. As in church, worship of God, His wholeness, His fullness, that kind of thing. Instead of the usual, which is just to say, if something conflicts, then church has to go. Because then that day will be like any other. then Sunday will become like any other day, where it will be buying and selling and commerce and industry, and there will not be any time for you to, in any way, shape, or form, carve off that time for God. If you don't do that really, really purposefully and really, really diligently, if you don't do that mindfully and purposely, it will go away. It'll go away fast. So when God gives you that extra day and says, remember this and keep it holy, he means don't despise his preaching or his word or his sacraments or anything like that, but gladly come to it and hear it. As you know, here at Good Shepherd, we don't just have services on Sunday morning, we have them on Wednesdays as well, because we understand that there are people who don't have any option on when they have to work. People who are first responders, police, firefighters, doctors, people who have scheduled things, that kind of thing. They don't have the option of not coming on a Sunday, so we offer things on a Wednesday. But as a Christian, you shouldn't ever say, I just don't have the time for God, period. I'm just too busy for it. I got lots to do. Got a lot of me time to do. You don't have that kind of option. You as a Christian have to at some point say, worship in God's house is important. It's necessary. It's crucial for me. I don't want to be in the world where I don't have that kind of space and time for him. He made the entire week a day longer just for this. It's up to us to respect that and to delight in it. All right, that's Commandments 2 and 3. Next time is Commandments 4 and 5. We'll catch you then.